to East Anglian Traditional Music Trust's Big Sky Traditions, a podcast where we look at all things music, dance and art from the Big Sky lands of East Anglia. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be chatting with traditional musician and curator of the Music Box Archive, Megan Wisdom. One of the first ways I ever found out about the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust was through the Music Box Archives and its rich and varied recordings, which are incredibly inspiring to listen to, and a resource I often refer back to whilst completing my own dissertation. Unfortunately, we had to record remotely over the internet as Megan was up in Newcastle finishing her degree in folk and traditional music, whilst I was down in Suffolk. However, it was an absolute pleasure chatting with her and hearing all about how the archive came to be and the wonderful projects she's currently up to. Alongside this, we'll also listen to some of Megan's top picks from the archive, tracks and recordings that have a particularly good story to them or significant meaning to Megan. Anyway, without further ado, here is my conversation with Megan. Hello, Megan. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm all right, thanks. You?
I'm doing really good, thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming along and chatting to me. I really appreciate it. And it's so great to have you on the podcast.
Nice to be here.
Well, I should say it's actually some of your work, which we're going to talk about today, which was what inspired me to kind of come up with this podcast idea and to want to produce for the E8EMT, because it's all the amazing work you've done through the Music Box Archive. But before we get to that, perhaps you could introduce yourself to everyone and sort of just say a little bit about your involvement with the East Anglia Traditional Music Trust.
Okay, yeah. So hi, I'm Megan. I've been going to folk sessions and events and things in Suffolk for pretty much as long as I can remember, really. And yeah, I really grew up in a sort of a folk community, particularly in my late teens. And of course, the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust has been a fairly big part of that in general. And yeah, I think I'm now on the folk and traditional music degree at Newcastle University, and there's something about moving away from the place you grew up in that makes you realise how good the place you moved away from is.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. Yeah.
And so it was thinking about that really, which inspired me to get in touch with the trust about this kind of project, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I think throughout the course of this little chat, we're going to talk a bit about some favourite bits of music of yours from the archive. But I mean, before we get to anywhere near that sort of thing, I mean, I'd really like to start off talking about your early days of music, because you mentioned you actually were into folk music as a teenager, right? Which I'll be honest, hey, I was as well. Not the coolest thing, though, I think, not the most popular thing at the time to do. Obviously, now we know it's the coolest thing ever. How did you get into that? How did you like folk music as a teenager?
Well, I always think I'm sort of into it by default, really, because I fairly well inherited my parents' music taste.
Yeah,
and they used to still do go along to folk sessions and things, and I would go with them. And yeah, so it's kind of the default setting.
Are your parents musicians as well then?
Yeah, they're both musicians, both sing. Mum plays the fiddle as well. Dad's a keen Morris dancer and concertina player.
Wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. Do you do a bit of Morris dancing yourself?
I do. Yeah,
that's
I'm
fantastic.
in a Cotswold team up here and a border team in Suffolk.
Oh wow! So I didn't realise there's teams for Morris dancing.
Mm-hmm.
That's wicked. Oh, cool. So alongside going to all of this kind of sessions and stuff, you worked on your own music. I can't quite remember, which instruments do you play?
Mostly I sing. I'm first and foremost a singer, really, but I also play the whistle and saxophone and other things.
So what drove you towards those instruments in particular to start with? And your voice, I mean.
Oh, well, I think people often ask when did you start playing your instrument? When did you start singing? But I can't remember who it was now. So that the right question is really, when did you stop singing? Because
yeah,
it's just something I've always done to varying degrees. I started playing the whistle mostly because it's the sort of thing that you have hanging around in the back of drawers and things. And I played the recorder at primary school, and it's not too much of a leap to go onto the whistle. And yeah, I started the saxophone as a child as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's interesting. It's interesting as well that you're saying, like, when did you stop singing? It sounds like singing really has just been a part of your entire life then, like from the beginning.
Well, you could say that. I think to varying degrees of awareness, really. Going to folk sessions and things, chorus singing and communal singing is an integral part of what they are. So even if I wasn't doing formal singing activities, you're still singing.
Yeah. Is there any particular songs you were raised with?
Gosh. Well, lots, really. Lots of folk songs. We very often used to have Steel I Span playing in the car. So
really?
I know that doesn't narrow it down very much because their repertoire is so massive. But I remember a lot of that.
Any particular favourite tracks?
Gosh. I remember The Dark-Eyed Sailor quite well.
That's wonderful. And I'm imagining, do you still perform this song like when you gig?
I have performed it. My mum and I sing together sometimes, and I think we've done that one in the past.
Wow. That's amazing. You guys sing together. That's so beautiful. That's really cool. So going on from when you were a kid and teenager, playing folk music in clubs and sessions, did you studied it at sixth form, I'm presuming, and like you studied music at sixth form, and then you've decided, oh really?
No, I didn't do
what?
Well, I did grades on saxophone and piano when I was at school, but I didn't do A-level music or anything. I just came to university after quite a few years of doing sessions and gigs.
All right, because I was going to say, what was the motivation behind doing your degree that you do? Because it's quite like a niche specialist degree.
Yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time, mostly.
At the time?
and still now. It still seems like a good idea. But
yeah. So what sort of stuff have you been doing as part of your degree?
Well, it's a mixture of performance and academic work. So running alongside studying voice is my first instrument. I am doing a dissertation at the moment on looking at the John Howson collection of interviews with Suffolk folk musicians.
What sort of stuff you uncover? Like, what sort of stuff is within this kind of recordings that you're finding?
Well, there's a lot of people talking about their musical lives when and before he collected mostly in the 80s. And I mean, what doesn't come into it really? Lots of it's about the music, but people drop in snippets of their lives. Which is fascinating.
I was going to say, is that a big part of it, the social history and part of your degree? I imagine there's a kind of historical side to it as well as musical, no?
Yeah, there is. It's got lots and lots of different aspects, pulls from an awful lot of different disciplines. So social history, sociology, anthropology, community music, teaching music, anything really.
Wow. That sounds fascinating. Brilliant. Well, before we go any further, I think it's time for a track. So what I asked before you came and chatted to me was I kind of asked you to pick out a few tracks from your own archive which have a particular meaning to you, and or a particularly good story behind them. So, like, what would be your first choice for a song?
Okay, my first choice, I think, is probably gonna be Roger Middleditch singing The Black Velvet Band.
Okay.
And that is because he learned it from Percy Webb when they used to go to sessions in Jolly Sailor in Orford. And I think probably I ought to leave it to Roger to tell in his own words exactly how he learnt that song and what it means to him, because he can do it far better than me. But it's on his interview, on his profile.
I'm not a great man for going to folk clubs to sing. I'm a public house singer, and that's how I always enjoy it.
Well, that's
if you understand what I mean. When you go to a folk club, and you're all got to sit there and hush, and you mustn't speak to the person next to you, and everybody's sort of because I was used to being brought up with noise in the background, and thankfully, or whatever you might say, I've been blessed with a powerful enough voice to cut through most of it if I really let it go. So. As a lot of people what do know me have heard it, so. And as for talking about the song, The Black Velvet Band, the old boy with the name of Percy Webb used to sing that at Orford. Yeah. And one week he wasn't there. And I sang it, and big old Freddie Smythe said to me, "Cool boy, you can't half sing that, can't you?" So he say, "You ought to sing how." I said, "Yeah, but in them days you didn't poach other people's songs. If you went to a certain area and you knew people sung them, so you didn't sing it when they were there, that was there." So anyway, he went out to the toilet. The poor old boy didn't. Some big old Fred Trumpman said, "Come on," he said, "I want you to sing that now." So I said, my poor old boy won't like it at all. He said, "Do you go on and sing it?" He said, "He won't play up." He said, "I shall soon tap him on the shoulder." And so anyway, I was singing it, and of course the dear old boy come back in. I got in at about the second verse, and he just stood in the doorway, and he just said, "That's my song," like that. Then I thought, "Oh no, now we've done it." And when I'd finished, he walked up to me, tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Not anymore." No, he said, "You can sing it better than me. You sing it." And that's, what do you say, great compliment. In a neat little town they called Belfast, apprentice to trade I was bound, and many an hour of sweet happiness have I spent in that sweet little town, till a sad misfortune came over me, which caused me to stray from the land, far away from my friends and relations, by the Black Velvet Band. Well, I took a stroll down Broadway, meaning not long for to stay. But who should I meet but this pretty fair maid, come a-trooping along the highway? For she was both fair and handsome, her neck it was just like a swan, and her hair it hung over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band. For her eyes they shone like diamonds, I thought her the queen of the land, and her hair it hung over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band. Well, I took a stroll with this pretty fair maid, and a gentleman passing us by. Well, I knew she meant the doing of him by the look in her roguish black eyes. For a gold watch she took from his pocket and placed it right into my hand, and black velvet band. Oh, her eyes, they shone like diamonds. I thought her the queen of the land. And her hair hung over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band. Well, before the judge and the jury, next morning I had to appear. And the judge, he said to me, young man, your case it is proven clear. You will spend 7 years penal servitude to be spent far away from the land, far away from your friends and relations, betrayed by the black velvet band. For her eyes, they shone like diamonds. I thought her the queen of the land, and her hair hung over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band. So come all you jolly young fellows, this warning take by me. When you are out on the towny lads, beware of the pretty colleen, for she fills you with strong drink, me lads, till you are unable to stand. And the very first thing that you'll know is you've landed in Van Diemen's Land. For her eyes, they shone like diamonds. I thought her the queen of the land, and her hair it hung over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band.
So I'm also keen, whilst I've got you here, to chat about your archive work. And that's kind of the main reason I've got you here, is to chat about the Music Box archives, which you've created for the EATMT, and it's still creating now, right? It's still an ongoing project, right?
Very much so.
Great. Well, I think first of all, I'd like to know, like, where did the inspiration come from to create this amazing archive?
Gosh, well, I said about moving away from a place and then realizing how good it is, and that is particularly applies to the folk scene, really. Having spent a lot of years being a part of that scene, and always realizing quite how much I enjoyed being a part of it and how much I was getting out of it. Suddenly not being able to do it quite so easily just brought home to me how many people are in it who are fantastic musicians and just real how to put it, individuals who come together to make up a community. When you go to a folk session or become part of a music scene like that, every person who decides to come along to sing something or to listen, just to take part in any way, is helping to make something greater than the sum of its parts. And that's a really special thing. And I wanted to share that with anyone who wanted to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, from listening to your archives and listening especially to the interviews, actually, you do get a sense of like you're like in the room, and you do like get a kind of warm sense of community, which I found especially like the dark times of like the pandemic and being locked away at home, listening to them. It just felt, obviously it's not like you're not actually out with people and in society, but it just brought you closer to it, and that sense of being part of something bigger, I completely get, and that's fascinating. And I think actually that's something you find in a lot of people engaged in the folk music world and traditional music world. It's not a lot of egos and kind of it's not about the individual. It's about being part of a greater thing, like you say. So it's absolutely fascinating. I'd be interested to know what your process was for making it. Like, how did you find these people? I mean, they're pretty obscure people you found in a way, right? How did you manage to track them down?
They are, at least so far, pretty much all people who I knew already, right, who are part of our folk music community. So it was just a matter of ringing them up and asking them, really.
You're just using your connections.
Yeah, pretty much.
I guess that kind of helps a little bit, yeah, if you're kind of conducting archival work and field recording, knowing people definitely helps. As someone who's been an outsider to the whole East Anglian folk music scene to an extent, finding people and interviewing them and chatting to them has definitely been a bit of a challenge. You know, it's tricky to get into that scene at some points. Wicked. And so once you've tracked down the person and you know who you're going to be recording, what's your process for recording? Because they're recorded really lovely. They're really beautifully recorded as well. And they've got lots of kind of space and ambience to them. What's your techniques?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I most of the interviews have been conducted in the interviewee's house. And so I take with me a little Zoom H2N recorder and a pair of headphones and just sit with them in their living room or conservatory or wherever they're most comfortable. And well, I'm not sure I actually say very much, or I try not to say very much, but just hopefully allow people to talk to or at me.
Yeah, it's interesting. You like to take a step back actually when you're conducting these. What's your reasoning behind that?
Well, I think, like you say, it's there's space in there, and it's not really about me, is it? It's not about what I think about folk music. Yeah. It's about what they think, and I like to give people the space to talk about that if they want to.
That's interesting. And it must be interesting as well conducting these interviews in their environment, right? I mean, it must change the dynamic of recording it and change the dynamic of when you presume like as you're interviewing them. It must change it, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just try to help people feel as comfortable as possible. So I hope that being in your own house is something that allows you to do that. But yeah, I don't know. I've never really, apart from today, I've never really been on the other side of it. So
okay, fair enough. Yeah, no, I think it's an important point you make about making people comfortable. And I'm as someone who, like, my job partly is field recording and going out and chatting to people and recording music. I've found similarly that it really does pay to like put people into their own spaces, allow them to express themselves in their way, and just give them the space to be themselves. You know. Yeah, it's really interesting. And so, have you faced any challenges along the way whilst you've been constructing this archive?
Well, biggest, most obvious one is the pandemic.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's been very, very tricky to find ways of recording whilst the pandemic has been going on.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. But other challenges, I think, is I've learned quite a lot of how to do it as I've been going along, about how to use the technology and things. And quite a lot of any editing that I've done has been using something like Audacity, so freebie, multi-tracking programs and things like that. And So that's been a challenge, but it's been a fun challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you cope with the pandemic? I find that very interesting to chat to people who kind of chat to people who chat to people. It did throw up an interesting issue. I mean, for example, we're now using like online distance software to chat to each other. And like that's for a lot of what I was doing during the pandemic. I was using this sort of thing, but I think for recording, like field recording and like creating an archive, distance probably didn't work. You know, using the internet probably didn't work so well. How did you sort of get around the pandemic, and how did you cope with it?
Well, really, I just waited until we could do it again in person, because I don't think that would have got the same results had I conducted interviews over the internet. I feel like creating a dialogue and an atmosphere in person with someone is actually, at least in the context which I'm doing it in, really quite important. I mean, that's just my own point of view, and maybe others might not feel the same way. But
no, I completely agree. So I guess before we have one more track, could you just tell me what's the future for your Music Box archive? Like, where would you like to see it go? How would you like to see it develop?
Well, it seems like a fairly obvious answer, but I'd just quite like to keep doing it, really. Just keep growing it.
Yeah.
Show what East Anglia's got to offer, and give something back to a community which has given me an awful lot.
It's lovely. That's wonderful. Yeah, that's so interesting. So I guess let's have another track. So could you say which track would be your second track that you'd choose out of the Music Box archive?
I'm going to choose I Wish I Were a Maid Again, sung by Judy Andrews. Judy and her husband Eamon were the first couple who I recorded after the end of the first lockdown. And so we did it at Wingfield Barns, where there's lots of space, and we were sat all spaced out, and I had all my extension leads going from my microphone and things, just to be as far back from them as I possibly could. And we had all the windows open for ventilation. Because of that, you can hear a little bird who is sitting just outside the window duetting with Judy while she's singing the song.
Wow, that sounds utterly entrancing. That's so beautiful. Fantastic. Well, let's have a listen to that. Thank you so much, Megan.
The next one was one, I think it's the song that's in the Penguin Book of Folk Songs, but it's also, I found out only recently actually, that it was sung by people like Sam Larner, and that's I Wish I Were a Maid Again, so I'm going to sing that. I wish, but it's all in vain. I wish I was a maid again, but a maid again I ne'er can be, till apples grow on an orange tree. I wish my baby it was born and smiling on his daddy's knee, and I would be in yon churchyard with the long green grass growing over me. When my apron strings hung low, he followed me through frost and snow, and now my apron's to my chin. He goes on by and says nothing. Oh grief, I'll tell you why. That girl has more gold than I, more gold than I, more beauty, more fame, and yet for her it will be the same. So I wish, but it's all in vain. I wish I was a maid again, but a maid again I ne'er can be, till apples grow on an orange tree.
So, to finish up chatting with you today, I'd really also like to chat about your own music career, because I know you're quite an established and talented musician, as well as kind of doing all this mad song collecting and archive work. Obviously, you talked about starting out as a teenager, and that was where your passion for folk music began. But you're continuing this on now, right? So how did you start gigging by yourself?
Well, it came out of singing by myself in pub sessions, and then it's difficult to pinpoint how it grew from there. Really, I just started doing more and more things. I believe I had entered a songwriting competition run by Hadley Folk and Acoustic Music Nights, who then invited me for a support slot, and yeah, it just sort of grew from there, really.
Yeah. So you write your own music alongside performing the more traditional stuff as well, then?
A little, yeah. I mostly perform traditional things, but I turn my hand to songwriting occasionally.
And do you think your folk background influences what you've written?
Yeah, very much so. Quite a lot of things I feel like I write sort of in the folk style.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sorry, I'm interested that you write your own material, and so what sort of subjects do you touch upon in your own pieces that you've written?
Well, I seem to touch on nature themes quite a lot. Animals, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. It's interesting. There is a big there's always that kind of big collaboration between like nature and folk and tradition, and there's the influence of one upon the other. That's fascinating. And you mentioned to me as well that you're playing in a duet now.
Yeah, my duo partner Mossy Christian and I are establishing ourselves, shall we say? So yeah, you can go and check us out on Facebook if you're interested in fun and joyful traditional music.
What, you're not singing like loads of really depressing traditional songs like they all are?
A few. Mostly it's pretty fun though.
And how did like this partnership start? How did you guys meet each other and start playing music?
We sort of knew each other from being in and around the folk scene. But I'm going to be, along with Mossy and several others, appearing in a production of Peter Bellamy's. Let me start that again.
That's all right, yeah.
Along with Mossy and others, I'm going to be appearing in a production of Peter Bellamy's ballad opera The Transports at Whitby Folk Week in August. And it was through rehearsing for that we decided to get together and get some of our own stuff together.
Wow, that's fantastic. I must admit, that's so cool. You're performing Peter Bellamy's The Transporter, man. That's so wicked. Are you a fan of Peter Bellamy? Because he was like a massive influence for me and my own music personally.
Yes. Well, he's always often got quite an East Anglian flavour to his stuff. So, yeah.
Would you say there's any inspirations behind your own work? Because obviously I was just saying, Peter Bellamy's big inspiration for me. Which sort of artists have influenced your music, would you say?
Most of my influence comes from the people who I've played with in sessions and things. Professional folk musicians, I often I'm drawn towards people like Nick Jones, Martin Carthy, Anne Briggs, people who are doing it sort of quite simple vocal style. But yeah, mostly it's just been from the community.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting. And is there a particular area of folk music that you're interested in, like in particular, and like you like to perform, or is it sort of just any old song, you know?
I've had comments before about how I tend to go for the happy songs, which I know is unusual in folk music.
It's very unusual.
But I quite like a song where everything turns out all right in the end. On this murder, you know?
Exactly. Someone's love getting lost at sea.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's refreshing to hear. I mean, I'll be honest, I've never ever met a happy folk singer before, so wicked. Cool. So let's finish off with one more song from the Music Box archives. Which song are you going to choose?
I think I'm going to choose a song which I recorded my dad singing towards the start of when I was doing the archive, which is The Mermaid. And I chose this one because it was always my favourite song as a child, because what is interesting about pop music when you've got stories of ships being sunk at sea by mermaids? That was always my favourite, and I was happy to be able to record him singing it.
That's so lovely. Oh, that's so wonderful. Well, Megan, thank you so much for having a quick chat with me today. I really appreciate it, and I'm so excited by all the work you're coming up with for the Music Box Archive. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you're going to kind of be recording next. If people want to check you out and check out your music, it's on YouTube, right?
Yeah, some on YouTube, some on my website, which is meganwisdom.co.uk, and I'm on social media as well. So, yeah.
Wonderful stuff. And if you want to check out the Music Box Archive, it's all on the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust website, right?
That's right.
Wonderful. And all for free, which is even better.
Yes. Absolutely.
All for free, even better. That's what we love to hear. Wonderful stuff. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Megan. And here's The Mermaid.
Thank you.
Friday morn when we set sail, it was not far from land. Our captain he spied a mermaid there with a comb and a glass in her hand, and the raging winds do roar, and the stormy seas do blow, and we jolly sail boys, we're up aloft, and the land lovers lying down below, 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 and the land lovers lying down below. And up jumped the captain of our gallant ship, and a fine old man was he, saying, "This fishing maid has warned us of our doom, we shall sink to the bottom of the sea, and the raging seas do roar, and the stormy winds do blow, and we jolly sail boys, we're up aloft, and the land lovers lying down below, 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 and the land lovers lying down below." And up spoke the mate of our gallant ship, and a fine-spoken man was he, saying, "I have a wife in old Salem town, and tonight she'll grieve for me, and the raging seas do roar, and the stormy winds do blow, and we jolly sailors, we're up aloft, and the landlubbers lie down below, 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 and the landlubbers lie down below. And up spoke the cabin boy of our gallant ship, and a fine young lad was he, saying, I have a girl in old Salem town, and tonight she'll grieve for me. And the raging seas do roar, and the stormy winds do blow, and we jolly sailors, we're up aloft, and the landlubbers lie down below, 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 and the landlubbers lie down below.
You have been listening to Big Sky Traditions, the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust podcast. I must firstly say a huge thank you to Megan for being up for chatting and appearing on the podcast, as well as a thank you to all of the artists you have heard throughout it. Like we mentioned at the end of the podcast, the Music Box archive is available from the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust website, where you can listen to it and download all the recordings for absolutely nothing. I would thoroughly recommend checking it out and having a listen through it. There's just some absolute gems in there. On the next episode, we'll be picking up where we left off and diving back into the world of step dancing with a trip down to Malden, Essex, to meet Mo, a traveller and step dancer of legendary status, hoping to find out more about the dance and the traditions associated with it. Till then, thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Saying I care no more for my pots and my pans, they can sink to the bottom of the sea, and the raging seas do roar, and the stormy winds do blow, and we jolly sailor boys, we're up aloft, and the sandlubbers lying down below, 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 and the landlubbers lying down below. The stormy winds do blow, and we jolly sailors, we're up aloft, and the landlubbers lying down below, 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 and the landlubbers lying down below, and the raging seas do roar, and the stormy winds do blow, and we jolly sailors, we're up aloft, and the landlubbers lying down below, 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 and the landlubbers lying down below. There you go.